let's move on to the next para. The following para tells about how they achieved freedom. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. That day, the day when this nation achieved freedom from apartheid. That day when Nelson Mandela was vowed to be the first black president. It is that day. That day had come about. How did this achievement had taken place? The unimaginable sacrifices. Unimaginable means difficult to imagine. The sacrifices that these freedom fighters had given, and of thousands of my people means the people who belong to the same color, those people on their unimaginable sacrifices, people whose suffering and courage can never be counted or repaid. So he said the people that have suffered so much for the cause of freedom from apartheid, the courage can never be counted, can never be repaid. I felt that day as I have on so many other days. He says that I felt there is a feeling that comes over Nelson Mandela on that day, as I have on so many other days. Other days also he had felt the same thing. What he had felt? That I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. He felt that he was a sum. He was a result of all those African patriots who had come and gone before him. So why he calls himself the sum? Because he is benefiting the sacrifices that they have done. In his time, all the sacrifices that these African patriots have done, he is enjoying the fruit. He and his generation are enjoying the fruit of all those unimaginable sacrifices and courage that these African patriots have shown. That long and noble line ended. The struggle was long enough. That noble line of these African patriots, it was a long struggle for freedom. That is called as that's what it means. He says that long and noble line, the long and noble line of this African patriots who struggled for freedom, who have sacrificed to get freedom, who had undergone all the cruelty. That line has ended. And now began again with me. And now began again with me means and now the new era has begun. And now began with me is these people have struggled, these African patriots struggled and tried to achieve equality. They didn't get when they were alive, but their sacrifices has bore the fruit, and now it has began when Nelson Mandela was vowed as a president. I was pained that I was not able to thank them and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices have wrought. Wrought is an old-fashioned English word. The meaning for wrought that is given in your textbook is to done, achieved. So Nelson Mandela is pained. He wants to thank them, but they are no more in this world. I'm pained because I'm unable to thank all those African patriots, and that they were not able to see what the sacrifices have accomplished, what the sacrifices have molded today. Okay, so this talks about the African patriots, how they have achieved freedom from apartheid. Let's move on to the next para. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. Now, here, what is the policy of apartheid? This question has been asked many a times. It was the policy of social discrimination followed in South Africa. A policy of apartheid is a policy of social discrimination followed in South Africa. This policy divided the white-skinned people from the colored-skinned people, and they were labeled on the basis of their color. Under this system, blacks were forbidden from living in white areas. Trains, buses, hostels, hospitals, colleges, schools, picnic spots, everything was different. Okay, they were all separate for whites and blacks. So in South Africa, white did not give equal rights to the native Africans. That is policy of apartheid. This policy created a deep and lasting wound in my country. When we hear Nelson Mandela speaking such things, we can feel his emotions there. We can feel the pain in these words. He says, this policy had created a deep wound. A long-lasting wound is a wound that doesn't heal in stages. It's called chronic wound that happens in a human body. But this wound is not physical. It's not only physical, it's in the emotions. So he says that this policy of apartheid had created a deep and lasting wound in my country, on my people, on his people, on the colored Africans. Then he says, all of us will spend many years. All of us means all the colored people. He says, will spend many years, if not generations, recovering from that profound hurt. So he says that the wound that this apartheid, that this policy had created on the hearts of the colored Africans will not be healed so easily. So people will take generations. It will take a lot of time to come out of that hurt. That hurt is profound. The meaning is intense. Profound means intense, very great hurt. So my people will take a lot of time, generations to come out of all those hurts. But the decades of oppression and brutality had another unintended effect, and that was that it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisulu, the Chief Luthulis, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sabuquez of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity that their like may never be known again. So he says that two things happened. The impact or the effect of this policy was, first I explained, it was a deep and the lasting wound on the hearts of these colored Africans. And it would take a long time. It would take generation to come out of that hurt. And the second point is, and the second effect was unintended effect. Unintended means not intended, not planned. The unintended effect was it produced men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. This decades of oppression and brutality had given birth to men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity. These people, these men were the African patriots. These were the freedom fighters who fought for the freedom from apartheid. And the list is given there along with their pictures in your readers. Oliver Tambus, Walter Sissulus, the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Sobuquist of our time. So these men, these freedom fighters, were the men with extraordinary courage. They showed courage to stand against this policy. They were full of wisdom to know how to bring the freedom for the nation, and they were generous. And their like may never be known again. So they're like, people like them will not be born again. Then couldn't be compared with others. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. Here he says, perhaps to bring forth such extraordinary men, it requires depths of oppression. They have really gone through a lot of difficult times, and they were oppressed only because of the color of their skin. So he goes on to say that to create or to produce such men of extraordinary courage, wisdom, and generosity, it needs depths of oppression. To create such heights of character. So you find the opposite words, the contrast words, their depths and heights. It is a figure of speech that means juxtaposition. You can underline depths of oppression and heights of character. That is, that entire line is juxtaposition. The contrast ideas are placed in the same line. Okay, that is juxtaposition. Juxtaposition is a literary technique in which two or more ideas, places, characters, and the actions are placed side by side for the purpose of developing comparisons and contrasts. And here we find the contrast ideas, heights and depths. And another, depths of oppression, heights of character, are metaphors. The figure of speech, again we find here depths of oppression, metaphor, heights of character, metaphor. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil. But I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people, finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Here in these lines, Nelson talks about the richness of his country. He says that his country is rich. He knows that his country is rich in minerals and gems, and these are in the soil of Africa. But greater than this material wealth is the wealth of his people. He considers the people, his people of South Africa, as greatest wealth because they are finer and truer than the purest diamonds. Finer, truer. He has used here superlative adjectives, finer, not just fine. Sorry, he has used here comparative adjectives, finer. So fine, finer, finest. True, truer, truest. So here he has used comparative adjective to bring out the meaning that yes, his people are the wealth of his nation. It is from these comrades in the struggle that I learned the meaning of courage. Now, the following passage that I'm reading here talks about the courage. He says comrades are colleagues, friends, companions, comrades in the struggle, the people who fought for the freedom, all those people in the struggle, he calls them as comrades. From them, he has learned the meaning of courage. Now he goes on to give the definition for courage. Time and again, I have seen men and women risk and give their lives for an idea. So over and over again, he has seen people, men and women, They have risked their life. Their life were at stake. They were ready to give up their life and give up their lives for an idea. Which idea? The idea of freedom. The idea to finish this policy of apartheid. I have seen men stand up to attacks and torture without breaking, showing a strength of resilience that defies the imagination. Stand up to means confront fearlessly, oppose boldly. The meaning here, stand up to attacks. These men and these women stood up. They opposed boldly. They opposed these attacks and tortures boldly, without breaking, without giving up, without losing hope. These people have stood up without failing, showing a strength and resilience. They showed their strength there. And resilience that defies the imagination. The meaning given for resilience in a textbook is the ability to deal with any kind of hardships and recover from its effects. Resilience, to stand and to face the problems. Defies, refuse to obey. So here, and resilience that defies, the ability to face any hardships and to recover from its effects. This ability of resilience, these freedom fighters, these men and women had shown, that defies the imaginations. A great ability to stand unchanged, defies the imagination, is beyond the imagination, is beyond what a normal person can think. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers the fear. Now, according to Nelson Mandela, what is courage? The definition that Nelson Mandela puts here is courage is not the absence of fear. So when you show courage, when you stand up against these attacks and torture, that doesn't mean that you are not fearful. A person who shows courage is obviously fearful. He's saying it's not absence of fear. That means fear is present there, but the triumph over it. But triumph means victory. But overcoming or showing victory over fear, that's what courage is. Who is the brave man according to Nelson Mandela? The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid. A brave man also feels afraid. That's a human trait. But he says that the brave man is the man who conquers that fear. You experience the fear, but a brave man will always conquer that fear. So we learn here that courage is not the absence of fear. Fear is present. But how do you face that fear? How do you overcome that fear? You have to stand against that fear. Maybe fear of studies, fear of examinations, not losing hope. We all get chances. You get chances over and over again. That's why God has given us such a big line of life. Okay, so he says, if a man of courage or brave man always conquers that fear. You have to study hard to get good marks in your exam. Fear will come. When fear is present, you will find the way to conquer that fear. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. So when a child is born in this world, a child does not bring with itself hate. So Nelson Mandela says that no one is born hating the other. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or because of his religion or of his background. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. He said if people learn to hate, they will obviously learn to love. And loving is not so difficult. According to Nelson Mandela, he says love comes to human heart more naturally. Even in the grimmest times in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed to our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second. Grimmest times. The meaning for grim is very serious. He had spent a lot of time in jail. So when he was in prison in those gloomy conditions, when my comrades and I, when his companions in the struggle and they were pushed to the limit. Pushed to the limit means when you push something to a limit, you make it work as hard as it can, that it breaks down or wear out. Push to limit is to reach to a point where the person is now going to break down or going to give up. That's what push to the limits. So he says when we were tortured so much that we were about to give up. He says, I would see a glimmer of humanity. Glimmer means to shine with an unsteady light. So when you have low voltage, your lights always go off and on and off. That's glimmering. So he says for a little while, even for a second, I would see this glimmer of humanity in one of the soldiers, in one of the guards in the prison. I would see a glimmer of humanity for even in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second. So when he was at the verge to give up, when he was at the verge to finish the struggle, he said that he would see a glimmer of humanity just for a second. For a second, when he would see this humanity and one of the guards, humanity, the human traits, loving, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, these are the humanity traits. And he says that just for a second, he would see this humanity and one of the guards. And that was enough to keep him going. It was enough to reassure me and keep me going. And that helped him not to give up, but to keep on moving forward. Where he was moving forward to achieve freedom for his people. Then you see a quote there, man's goodness is flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. So he says, man's goodness is a flame. That flame can be hidden, but it is never extinguished. It never goes off. Now, the figure of speech that you find in this passage is glimmer of humanity. It's a metaphor where the unsteady light is compared to humanity. Then you find that man's goodness is a flame. Again, this is a metaphor where a character of a man is compared to a flame. So, I have explained to you till page 21.